Hey everybody, it's Rajesh here.
And Tane here.
Welcome to our podcast, Baskets of Knowledge, Chats with a Difference. In our podcast, we invite guests from around the country and around the world to talk about how they got to where they're at the moment. It's about a journey, it's about an experience, it's about their life. Kia ora koutou, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Baskets of Knowledge. And Tane is back today. Hopefully, you all enjoyed Tane's episode last week. Tane, big day for you. Yesterday, you submitted your honours thesis. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I guess it's cool to just see it all come together. I think you work so hard at it for the year, and there's times where you're constantly looking at the same stuff and you're honing in on one particular issue that you're interested in. And so I think it's been really cool just to sit down yesterday, do my final proofread, and just realize, I guess, how much work has gone towards it, because sometimes you don't realize what extent your work is actually achieving until you put it all together and have a look at it.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. When you start the beast, I'm going to call it the beast, in January or February, and you just, like you said, just before we started the podcast, you're like, it just happened, like it just happens. But at the end, when you compile it, you go, whoa, this is actually quite a good piece of work that I've done. But it's only at the end that you realize, hey, this is actually pretty cool. At the start, everything is going to be, it's pretty challenging. But at the end, you go, hey, this is pretty awesome. So well done, you. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome. Right, as you know, we can keep talking, but it's not about Tana and myself. If you want to hear about that, the last episode was Tana and myself, so go listen to that there. This week, once again, we have got an amazing guest, and as our regular listeners know, we think everyone in the country is amazing, and around the world is pretty amazing, but we don't have the funds or the time to get everyone on here. So we are really privileged and honored to have Hope on our podcast today. Kia ora, Hope, and welcome to Baskets of Knowledge.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. Hope, for our listeners out there, do you want to tell them a bit about who you are at this moment in time, and then we'll talk about how you got to where you were.
Okay. Kia ora, everyone. My name's Hope. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an 18-year-old politics student at Victoria University. I also study creative writing. I am queer, deaf, and disabled, and those facets of my identity mean that I've faced a lot of challenges in my life, and I spend a lot of my free time advocating for those communities and trying to make Aotearoa New Zealand a more accessible place for everyone. One of my big pieces of mahi at the moment is that I'm campaigning for a legal captioning standard for increased media accessibility for deaf and hard of hearing people. And ideally, I'd also love for there to be audio description for blind people as well.
Beautiful. What a great, there's so much there to start off with, Hope, and it's beautiful. And this is the reason why we love you on this podcast, because there's so much that we can talk about. So let's talk about you advocating for all these amazing things. When did this become something that you're really passionate about? You're 18 years old. When I think about when I was 18, I was like, oh, I'm going to go to university, happy days, don't worry about things. But obviously you have got lots of things happening in your world. At which point did you go, wait a minute, someone has got to do something because no one's doing something?
I think I've always had big feelings, and growing up disabled, you have to be your own advocate, otherwise nothing gets done. That isn't to say that there aren't able-bodied allies, but I think the educational system was very inaccessible for me. So from a young age, my parents had to advocate for me, my teachers had to advocate for me, and I had to learn how to advocate for myself and my needs. Otherwise, I would just miss out and be brushed aside. So I kind of learned from a young age, okay, I need to start standing up for myself. And that was difficult. I'm not the best at it. I still am quite a conflict avoidant person, funnily enough. So how I ended up at advocacy, I'm not quite sure. But I think for me, the big turning point was probably in the senior levels of NCA. I was really struggling to keep up with schoolwork because with COVID and everything, there was so much of it online, and there was a lot of video format stuff, and a lot of information I needed for exams was on videos, and they weren't captioned. So I had no way to access the information, and I was getting really confused and really behind, and teachers either couldn't or wouldn't caption the information. Some teachers were great, by the way, not all teachers, but there were a few. And I was like, this is so frustrating. I can't access this information. And obviously my whole life, like I've struggled to access like broadcast media and stuff. So like watching the TV with the family, and watching the news and stuff isn't always accessible to me. It's gotten better in recent years, but it's definitely still not perfect. But I remember I was at Deaf Club or the Wellington Deaf Society. I go there sometimes, hang out with some deaf people. It's a great time. And I was complaining about this, and everyone was like, yeah, this sucks so much. And then I have this deaf friend called Oscar who grew up in Australia, and he's like, oh, over there. I was so shocked when I came over here because over there they had laws against that so that all the media was accessible. And I was like, we should have that. So kind of realizing, there is a way to make this accessible was a turning point for me. And I feel like my involvement in the deaf community has helped me to kind of realize and idealize what the world could look like if it was accessible. I like to talk a lot about the social model of disability, which is the idea that disabled people are more disabled by society than they are by their bodies. Like, if society just had time to make things accessible, there's a lot we could do. Like, there's nothing I can't do except here. And some physical stuff, I also have dyspraxia, but you know, yeah, so I remember the first time I went on a deaf camp, and we went up to Kutakareo in Christchurch, and it was amazing because it was made by deaf people for deaf people. So it was fully accessible. All the alarms and light had like flashing lights, all the tables were round, nothing was blocking your view, so you could always lip read and sign. And I just felt so included. And I'm not fluent in sign, but I understood so much more. And I was like, this is so great. And I vividly remember coming back to the airport after that camp and going back into like, I have no idea what the flight announcements are saying. There's something on the TV and I don't know what it is. And there's all these people in the security line talking to me and I have no idea what they're saying. And being like, wow, that is such a stark contrast. And I wish we could have a world more like that camp where everything was accessible to me. Yeah, and I think that kind of straightened me a fire of actually I deserve better and other people deserve better. I want the next generation of deaf and disabled people to have more access to like this world, and I don't want anyone else to have to go through what I went through. So that kind of started my journey for me, and then from that, I realized there was other things I could advocate for, and that's when I kind of started my queer advocacy as well.
No, I love that. I mean, I love that because, with a lot of people that get into advocacy for whatever it is, it's a simple conversation in the most random places where it lights a fire and a spark to go, actually, wait a minute, if it can be done elsewhere, why can't it be done here? And I think that's really awesome. And it's really quite awesome that Australia are ahead of us, which is pretty crazy because normally they're
yeah, no, most when it comes to captioning and generally accessibility, New Zealand is quite far behind a lot of other countries. We are definitely not following the UN CRPD, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which we ratified, I think, in 2008. And there's a lot of things in there, but one of the things that New Zealand agreed to was like to provide accessible education, accessible news media, a way to access the full things of society. And we haven't necessarily followed up on those promises at all. So yeah, we're actually one of the only countries in the OECD that doesn't have a mandatory captioning legislation, which isn't the best.
no, it isn't the best at all. And I guess what is harder for myself is that we all live in a world where we just think everybody's world is the same. But the more that I work in education and the more I work with young people and with adults, I realize actually, wait a minute, a red apple is not a red apple to everybody. Everyone sees things from so totally different ways for either due to cultural upbringing, through physical challenges, through learning, whatever. And everyone sees things differently, and it's changed the way that I've thought about how to interact with an individual.
Yeah,
And
I
I'll
feel
get
like so much of society is made from a specific worldview, and there's all these different minority groups that just don't quite fit into how society was set up. And I think a lot of people don't understand how inaccessible Aotearoa is if they haven't talked to a disabled person. Like, I face so many different examples of inaccessibility in my day-to-day life that so many people just don't think of until they have a conversation with me and they're like, I never thought about that.
Yeah, and it's really hard because it's no one's fault, right? I remember a conversation I had with my colleague, and she said to me, "Hey, Prajesh, I will never understand racism because I'm a white person. I'm a white." In the same way that you will never understand what's sexism because you're not a female, and that's blown my mind because it shows that, hey, wait a minute, we talk about all these things here, but unless you're in those shoes there, no one actually realizes. So you can't actually tell somebody, hey, if someone is, for example, if I said to you, hey, Hope, doesn't matter that you're hard of hearing. It's the world is fine. How can I say that? Because I'm not living your world, and yet
Mm.
the world seems to be thinking, hey, she'll be right, which is crazy. Well, I think
Yeah,
it's crazy.
there's definitely a lot of that. And yeah, my main advice to people when they're trying to be allies to disabled people is definitely just to listen. Because I
Yeah.
feel like so often people are like, I know what disabled people want and I'm gonna go do it. And it's like, have you talked to a disabled person about that first?
That's right.
Which I think can be applied to most minority groups and underserved communities. Nothing about us without us, right? Like if
100%.
you're trying to help a specific group, you need to have that group involved in whatever solution you're trying to create. Otherwise, it's not going to meet the mark.
100%. And I guess, Tana, you're facing the same thing at the moment in the Women's Rugby League. So just for some context, Hope Tana is involved in encouraging young wahine to get involved in rugby league in Southland / Otago. And the challenges that you're facing are pretty interesting, aren't they? Or have been interesting.
Yeah, I think just some of the conversations, very much still, set within a certain regime that is supposed to be followed because that's the way it's always been. But, as we've discussed, the very different styles of games, they should be treated as different games. And I just think there's so many small strategies that if they were to change, it would make the game so much better. But it's still almost at a standstill where we're fighting against different things. And, then there's the other layer on top of me going into the female space as a male coach. Yesterday, I went to a woman in sport Otago. They had a talk about menstrual cycle and how that affects female athletes. And I was the only male there, which again, is very much breaking that stigma around, these conversations are ones that we need to understand if we're going to go into these situations. But again, it's, how do you approach it? And I guess it's just trying to make those first steps so that we can break those barriers and, at the very least have these conversations so people can see both sides of the story.
And as you said, Hope, it's about listening, right? It's about listening, and not just listening, but also hearing. Because lots of people listen, but they don't hear. Oh, I've ticked the box. I've listened to you.
I'm
See you
not the
later.
best
Thanks.
at hearing, but I get what you mean by active
Yeah,
listening.
exactly. Yes, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, which is pretty crazy, right? So you start this really this passion, this lights up. How do you start making things happen? Because we have an idea. We all have ideas, but some of us just sit with them and nothing happens. But obviously, help you like, cool. I'm going to take this to the next level. What did you do?
It was kind of gradual and also very fast at the same time. And if I did it again, I would do it differently because I didn't really know what I was doing getting into advocacy. And I didn't know about the support networks in place. And doing it now, I know who to contact and who are the people who are really passionate about this and how to like tap the shoulders of different deaf community groups and be like, hey, because we've already advocated and put petitions forward to the government for captioning legislation like before multiple times and they've ignored us, but that's fine. Yeah, so I think looking back, I would definitely do it differently, but I kind of started by researching it, making sure that I kind of knew what I was talking about. And once I had a fair bit of research that I was doing in study sessions and stuff, instead of actually studying, but she'll be all right. I started emailing local politicians and trying to get them involved and being like, hey, this is an issue. I'm really passionate about it. Have you had a look at this and at the community demand for this? And they replied to me after a few months, but I wasn't really taken overly seriously. And I was like, okay, I probably need something more. So I decided to make a petition. And I was like, I may as well. We've done it before. I can do it again. Um, and then me and my good friend Zoe spent most of our study spells emailing different news outlet medias in New Zealand and trying to sound real professional. And we're like, does this sound like we know what we're doing? And just like emailing people and emailing different like advocacy groups and different groups for disabled people and just trying to get the message out there and bugging people and stuff. And I guess once you start and get that momentum going, it's a lot easier to continue. But it's just getting your foot in the door, really. For me, once I kind of got the help of bigger organizations, it was much easier. There were lots of different deaf clubs around the country who helped support my petition. Deaf Aotearoa was amazing. And also, I'm part of a group called The Hive, which is a collaboration between Curative and MYD that works at advocating for youth interest in policy. So we analyze policy and say what like the youth voice would say. We do engagements with the youth being like, hey, what do you think about this? and we also translate things to the youth so they can understand it, and then we bring that back to the government. So through that, I learned a lot about how to kind of interact with government in a way that they will understand, and how to build traction with social movements and stuff. And that was a really good support network. And I also got involved with Spark, the like broadband phone company.
Yeah.
They were doing this thing called the All In Conference, where they were trying to raise issues of digital inequity. And they put together a group of young people who are all really amazing, some really cool people. And I was one of them, which was really cool. And they brought us up to Auckland to speak at this conference about digital inequity and try and come up with some solutions. And from that, they kind of boosted my petition and got me a couple extra 1,000 signatures, which was really nice. And they also committed to, as a company, captioning all of their advertisements and like in-house stuff, which was really cool. Yeah, so from there it kind of just spitballed and continued. So I guess my main piece of advice to anyone trying to get into it would just be keep on trying, because you get turned down for things and people will ignore you, but some people will also pay attention and listen, and you just kind of have to keep on going, which can be hard and you do lose steam, but you kind of just have to keep on trying until you get your foot in that door, and then things will start to open up.
And as you say that, what kept you going? Because I'm sure there were times you're like, oh, why am I doing this here? Or were you always in the drive?
I think I started from a place of real anger and disappointment. And that isn't really a sustainable emotion. It's a very valuable emotion, especially as someone in an underserved community. But it can't be the only thing that drives your advocacy. Otherwise, you do burn out. And I definitely experienced a lot of burnout. I think for me, obviously, I'm still learning. I'm very young. I don't have all the knowledge in the universe here. But for me, I also had to come at it from a place of hope. Because if I didn't have hope for the future, then I just couldn't do it. And it's really hard, I think, to advocate for yourself, because continually butting heads and be like, I deserve these accommodations, I deserve to be treated as a person, is a lot harder than being like, this community deserves. Because if people constantly tell you that you're not good enough, you start to believe it. So I had to make it less about myself, even though my experiences are obviously quite important to it, and more about my community, who I really care about and love, and about advocating for them and having hope to make things better for them, so they don't have to all experience what I did. And I think,
totally.
especially within my advocacy for the queer community, I had a really hard time coming to terms with my identity, being bisexual. I grew up in quite a religious, conservative environment, and it was not a good time. So for me, that was really important, because I still hold a lot of anger and resentment about the way I was treated within the church. And that just wasn't productive. And it was valid, and it definitely is still valid, but it wasn't helping me to make things better. So having hope, I helped run the QSA at my high school, and I would just look at the kids in there and I would fight for them. I would have hope for them, because I knew that they wouldn't have to go through what I went through. And that kind of got me through that.
It's awesome to that, because someone's got to be a leader, and you got to have a first follower, right? And it's always, and I love what you said at the end there, that hey, it started with you, but then the bigger picture is not about you. The ripple effect is, yes, hope's life will improve, but it's not just about hope. It's about this vast amount of people whose lives are going to change dramatically, because they will change dramatically because of the work that you and your peers have done as you go forward. But it's always hard. Being the first person to do something is always hard. I'm going to change tact a little bit. And would you mind exploring you spoke about coming out as bisexual, and you mentioned that was pretty challenging. Is that something you're comfortable speaking
I'm happy
about?
to share my story about that.
Yeah, fantastic.
I have actually, this kind of links into disability as well. I have a fair amount of religious trauma, and something I'm still working through. I actually now co-lead a monthly church service called Belong, which is LGBTQ affirming, because I couldn't really find anything like that in the Hutt Valley. And I was like, well, if you can't find him, make a new one. And my friend Caleb was of a similar mindset, so we were like, I guess we can try. But yeah, so I think my struggles with the church started quite young. Being deaf and disabled, so it makes some people quite uncomfortable within faith communities, because they're like, well, why won't God fix you? And so people would pray for me to be healed, which came from good intent. But when I wasn't, it was like, oh, well, you're not a good enough Christian. You're inherently sinful and wrong, because if you were good enough, if you believed enough, God would have healed you. And because he hasn't, you were wrong, you were bad, you were sinful. And that wasn't a great rhetoric, and it affected me quite negatively. And I think I was genetically predisposed to it, but it had a large impact in my development of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
And that became quite religiously oriented, and having to like pray a certain amount of times so God wasn't mad at me, and so I wasn't sinful and wrong because I was disabled, which wasn't a great rhetoric. I went to therapy, I got through that. That was chill. That we figured that one out. And then I went to my new high school, which I have a very mixed relationship with, because the parts of it were really great. But it was quite religious. It was a single sex religious high school, and it was around then that I started to kind of awaken and be like, oh, boys, girls, they're both fun. And I didn't really have the language for that yet, but I was just kind of figuring it out and starting to learn about that, about myself. And I remember I had a crush on a friend of mine at the time, and I was like, oh, this is exciting and fun. And it's just like young kids being like, oh, this person's pretty, isn't this exciting? And then I remember going to a Christian studies class, and the teacher told us that being gay was equivalent to bestiality and pedophilia, which, very horrible things, and that we would burn in hell if we were gay. And that was quite traumatic for me, and I still have nightmares about that teacher. And I was like, oh, that's not great. And I took her word as the truth, and I believed that, and I internalized that, and I, in true Kiwi spirit, started to try to DIY conversion therapy myself. And yeah, I went into a really dark spiral of self-hatred, because I was like, oh, it was kind of the same thing as a disability. I would pray to be healed of the like gayness. And when I wasn't, I was like, okay, it's a problem with me rather than a problem with the idea that being gay isn't wrong. And it was really difficult for me. And I went into a really dark time in my life. And then, eventually I did come out the other side. I got help, and I started to accept myself. My parents, my family, thankfully, were very accepting, and it kind of got me to realize, actually, God is love and God is good. And I just fundamentally can't believe that a good and loving God would create me so unable to connect with him. And from there, I kind of started to be able to reconcile my queer identity with my faith, which was really nice. But, once I started coming out to people, I did like lose people, especially within my faith community. I remember coming out to a Bible study group that I was quite close with at the time. And they were like, well, you can't even act on it. You can't even get married, blah, 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 blah. But we accept you, but you can't get married. You can't act on it. I was like, that's not really that accepting. And just, they wouldn't let it go. And they were like, oh, being gay is just a trend and everything. And it was just there. And I had a panic attack about that and cried for about 2 hours. And then after that, I really struggled to enter a church building without having a panic attack for a few years. So that was quite difficult for me. And that's still something I struggle with. I find that I have a faith that I'm quite proud of, and I love God, and I want to connect with God. But the church has hurt me profoundly. So trying to navigate that has been difficult. And I think I'm getting there. In my last year of high school, I ended up being like the Christian special character captain, and also being openly queer, which I think confused a few people, but I managed. And now I run Belong, and that's a really nice space for me to kind of continue on with my faith. But that was definitely a journey that I had to go through, and I think I still held some hurt from the church. And it can be hard to hold that my faith is so important to me, but also people who follow that faith have hurt me. And it's kind of holding dual opinions in a way, but I just kind of have to hold that. And I'm not completely finished working through that, I don't think, but I'm definitely at a better place than I was.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's a profound part of your life. And I think the other thing as well, it happened in your formative stages of life. And I think that's where the impact comes in. But what I love about what you just said there is there's two things. You mentioned faith and you mentioned church. So, and we see this all the time. The faith is strong in each of us, whatever the faith is, with whatever it is, it doesn't actually matter, whatever name we give it. But it's the people-centric side that affects us all.
People are fundamentally flawed, and my mother loves to say absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you have these powerful institutions, and it becomes that you can't question them without questioning God,
Yeah.
there's so much abuse of power that happens. And I think being able to have your faith and have a like small community and being able to separate that from the church is really
Yeah.
important to having a healthy faith, because institutions, religious institutions, can be so harmful and so dangerous. And I think faith can bring a lot of good things into people's lives. And I like would recommend it. I love having a spiritual side to my like well-being and everything. But I think that institutions can be quite flawed, and it's really important to acknowledge that. I definitely went through a time in my life where if anyone tried to question the church in any way, I freaked out and I was like, oh, you can't do that. And now I'm like, actually, it's probably a very good idea to do that, because if you can't question a power, how are you going to stop it when people abuse that power and do very horrible things, which, the church historically has
Yes.
done some pretty horrible things.
Yeah, totally. I mean, every faith, if I think about the world at large at the moment, every single conflict is because of not the faith, but the people's perspective of what faith is, which is
Mm,
causing conflict. All gods, whatever we believe in, God or spirituality, whatever it is, at the end of the day, like you said, Hope, it's all about love. Doesn't actually matter.
mm.
But the conditions that we've put on is, oh, you have to have these conditions, then love will happen, which is ridiculous. And I
It
think,
is, especially when the Bible talks about unconditional love. And then
yes,
Christianity is like, but what about all these conditions?
yeah,
And that's the religion I've grown up in, so it's the one I know the most about. But I found that generally most religions that I've looked into tend to all be about love and peace and respecting each other. I feel like that's generally something we should all be able to agree on without trying to have wars over which religion is right. Because if we're all about being nice to each other, maybe we can just chill out a little.
yeah. If everything's about being nice, then how are we not nice? It's just so ridiculous, actually ridiculous. Which is, I mean, the world is a ridiculous place, but it's awesome that. But the thing that I really love about this whole conversation, though, is it didn't stop you. Some people get so overwhelmed and they just fall in line. They go, all right, cool, this is it. I can't offend my institutional leaders. I'm just going to do what I need to do. And then there's some people like yourself, the Chanel, who actually go, actually, wait a minute, this doesn't define who I am. And then
Mm,
you make change. It's a bit like what you're doing with the captions. It
mm.
affects you, but it affects the impact is massive for everyone else. So I think that's really beautiful. But
Yeah.
it's a challenge. But no one's saying it's easy. No one is saying you wake up in the morning
Yeah.
smiling every
No,
day.
I'm very, very flattered that you just compared me to Chanel, because they are so badass.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Chanel a few weeks ago, and hopefully we are going to get them on the podcast in a few weeks' time, please, Chanel. So yes. No, but I mean, but the work that you have both been doing is if we don't look at scale, even if you just change one person's life,
Mm.
that's all that matters, right? I think a lot of
Yeah, if
times
I
people,
save one person from having to deal with what I've dealt with, I think I
yeah,
will be very happy. And I say that, I mean, there's obviously people who've had a lot worse lives than I have. I still have a lot of privilege, but I
yeah.
just want to make the world better and leave it better than I found it. And if I can do that for just one person, then it will be worth it.
100%. And I think sometimes we feel guilty about privilege, but I think this is the world we live in. And you go, right, cool, this is my circumstances. I can't control it, but what can I change for someone else? And
Mm.
then we go, right, cool, I'm just going to do this because from the heart, the impact is amazing. Um, Beautiful. I just love your energy, which is fantastic. Tanya,
Thank
any
you.
questions? Any questions for Hope?
Oh, you've put me on the spot now.
Oh, I can carry on. I'm going to ask you while you think of a question there, Tanya. I'm going to ask you. So, Hope, we spoke about. I mean, you did some really cool things there, but how did you? Okay, young person, you are 14, 15, 16, 17, and all this started going on. Your peers
Mm.
are doing what other quotation marks this for those that can't see it. I'm going to quotation mark saying they're doing normal 17, 18-year-olds. What is that like for you, living this parallel world of being a young person, but also trying to advocate for everyone else, I guess?
I think, yeah, I feel like a lot of people assume that young people aren't politically motivated, and some
Yeah,
definitely aren't. But there definitely are other people out there like me. There's a lot of them, and I feel like a lot of my good friends are also in some sort of advocacy and doing amazing things. And I've met some really amazing people. I mean, there definitely is something a bit isolating about it. Like my friends have all been very supportive of me, but I always kind of felt like I didn't quite fit into the normal teenage social scene anyway, because it wasn't necessarily accessible to me. Like people would go out and party, and I had no idea what anyone was saying, and I couldn't communicate. And I was like, this is not it. And I also have endometriosis, which means that when I have flare ups, I get really, really fatigued. So I'm not someone who has a huge amount of social energy to burn sometimes. So I kind of wasn't a typical teenager anyway, in that regard. In some ways, I am. I'm still, a little nerd teenage girl. I do have good teenage friends. Like I have my D&D group, and we meet together once a month and do very nerd-like activities. And I have my school friends and my church friends and my advocacy friends, and I've definitely made some really cool friends, and I don't necessarily feel too different to other young people. But to me, I feel like my advocacy isn't what's made it isolating so much as my being deaf is probably the thing that makes me feel the most isolated from other young people who aren't deaf, which is why it's great having other deaf young people as friends. They're awesome. But yeah, just making friends and socializing with people who don't understand that can be quite difficult because it's just so hard to communicate. And I think learning sign language has been instrumental in me building confidence and being able to communicate better. But that's still something that's quite difficult when meeting new people or going to I'm not one for clubbing, for example. A lot of people were doing that when we started uni for freshers and stuff. And I was like, I have no idea what is going on. I'm gonna go home.
Yeah.
But that's just life, isn't it?
That is life. But I love that. What I love about, I use the word love quite a bit today for some weird reason, is that you spoke about like attracts like, is what I believe. So, you spoke about your group of friends that you've created are very similar minded to you. Conversely, you're going to have people that have no interest at all in the space, but they're going to attract each other, and then things will change. So, I think there's that saying there: the five people around you are going to dictate how your life is going to go, or something similar to that. I'll put you that saying there. So it's pretty awesome that you found people that are similar minded. And the word nerd, I love nerds. I think nerds are amazing. I think if there were no nerds, the world wouldn't have all these crazy
I
cool things
don't
that
use
happen.
nerd as a derogatory term so
Exactly.
much. It's
Yeah.
just honestly, nerds are very fun. I love chatting about random, very hyper specific topics with people. And it's great talking about Tudor history or some specific fashion period or D&D or Star Wars. It's a great time. I do
Yeah.
love Star Wars. Yeah, so things like that. It's a lot of fun.
Can I tell you a secret? I watched my first Star Wars movie just pre-COVID. I hadn't watched
Oh
any Star Wars
wow.
since then. I
I
know.
hope you enjoyed it.
And I'm hooked. I'm hooked. I watched all the Ashoka. I watched everything. I'm like, oh, when's the next episode coming? It's just
Oh
so great.
yeah, I love Ahsoka. She's such a fun character.
Yeah,
Probably not in the first few seasons of Clone Wars, but after that,
yeah,
she's a very fun character. Yeah, no,
yeah,
I have been a Star Wars girly since whenever I could find the caption versions.
yeah.
No, Star Wars was a very big part of my childhood. I actually have a massive Darth Vader figurine on my shelf right now.
Yeah.
It's a great time.
Oh, amazing. Tanya, I saw you shaking your head when you heard about Star Wars.
Yeah, honestly, you got to get on that trend sooner. You've been missing out. I'm glad you've finally jumped on the trend. I've figured out a question for Hope. So talking about advocacy, I think an important question, I guess a lot of people who advocate get asked is how do you decide, like where to put your energy? Because obviously these are topics or areas that you're so passionate about, and you could, say I'm going to advocate for everything, but unfortunately there's only so much energy you can put towards a cause. So how do you choose, where
That
to put
is That is a very good question, and it's definitely something that I haven't got entirely figured out because if I could, I would advocate for everything. I think generally I try to advocate for things that I've lived experience in because I don't want to take away the space from other people who are better at advocating for things that they understand better. Like obviously I will support an allyship, but I'm not going to take up the stage for something that I can't actually have the lived experience for because I'm not going to be the best person for that job. So yeah, women, young people, queer people, deaf and disabled people. I like advocating for those people. Um, and yeah, it does. There's a lot of different things, and I find it very hard to say no. I'm a bit of a people pleaser. I'm working on it. So it is difficult, but I have my color coded Google Calendar, and it's like planned down to minute details for my assignments and all my other random things that I'm doing because I have no chill. And most of the time it works out okay. Every once in a while I'll have a little bit of burnout, and I'm learning how to say no now. And generally I try and do things that I know will be good and uplifting for my communities. Um, it's
How
not
does
something I've entirely figured out, but
how does Hope chill? How does Hope chill? Got all this going on here.
I
What does
love
that look like?
poetry. I
Yeah.
write a lot of poetry to kind of like meditate on my day and just kind of practice self-reflection and meditation and get my mind in a good place. And it also just helps me express any emotions or stresses that are building up. So I do a lot of creative writing to relax. I try to get outside and, be amongst nature and just clear my head that way. Um, Socializing is nice. In saying that, I'm also an introvert, so like I need to socialize to be happy to see my friends, but then also I need to sleep after that. Otherwise, I will turn into like a little gremlin goblin monster. Um, Reading is a big thing for me. It's a way that I like switch off and I just like can immerse myself in some other reality. I also love watching really obscure YouTube videos on really random topics. Um, yeah, I feel like those are kind of the things that I do to relax.
So much going on there. So much happening there. Like sleep was there, but so many other things there, which is pretty cool. That was a great question, Tanya, because it leads on to the fact that you do so much. There's so much happening. Plus, you're also studying, and amongst all that, there's so how have you found the transition from school to university? So you said when you were at school was really challenging,
Mm.
especially I mean for you, the COVID year really brought it out, just highlighted the whole thing. Now you come to
Yeah, no, I
university,
had COVID all through, all 3 years of NCA were COVID, so that was
yeah.
a lot of fun. Actually, in year 13, I had COVID during the exam season and I missed all my exams. But actually for
uh,
me, that was quite a relief because I did well on my mocks, so I could just relax.
you're like, boom, bring it on, happy days. So do your mocks, guys. It's great. Um, Yeah, so now the transition to university. University is a whole different ballgame altogether. And they have their support services, but you walk into a lecture, you have a lecturer who's, I mean, some are amazing, some are not so amazing. This is human life. What has it been like for you as a young person? If we take away the advocacy hats and we just go pure student hat.
To be honest, uni's been amazing for me actually because it's been a lot more accessible. It's definitely not perfect, but they have funding for sign language interpreters, so I can understand classes now. So that
Amazing.
has been awesome. Shout out to Nicola and Jeanette, my main interpreters. They're absolute legends. But yeah, no, having my classes interpreted, even though I'm not actually fully fluent in sign language yet, has been amazing. I understand so much more. I'm able to just like focus, understand concepts. It's been such an instrumental thing to my education. I also have note takers, so I don't have to like look down to write notes and then look up and have missed a signed sentence, which is really
Yeah.
nice. So that's just been having those extra accommodations has been so amazing. I'm very happy about that. Obviously, uni is a step up, like organizational wise, and it's a lot more self-reliant. But I actually kind of prefer that to high school because in high school, after COVID and working from home, I've realized that was way more efficient. So I was like, why would we go back? Um, I mean, I did miss my friends. But yeah, I think for me, especially because I have no chill and I sign up for so many things, I was already kind of scheduling quite a lot. So it wasn't too hard for me to kind of come up with a schedule. I was quite unwell in the first try, so that kind of threw things out of the mix a bit. I have like chronic migraines and I had a really big flare up and I just like was quite unwell for a wee while. But we got that sorted and then it was fine. So like I love my classes. They're all really interesting. I can understand what's going on now. It's been really great. I've been actually loving it. And it's nice to be able to like nerd out on subjects that people also want to nerd out on and not have to do things that I'm not interested in. Like I'm not a huge statistics person. So not having to take that anymore, great.
Yay for the BA. Boom, boom, right?
Yeah, BA. I write about my feelings. My flatmate
Exactly.
Olivia is like the exact opposite. She's like full STEM. She's doing like computer engineering, and we'll come and do study sessions. And she's writing on what looks like a foreign language on this computer, and it's all intense. And I'm like, and this makes me feel la 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 la, and it's great.
Yeah, it's so interesting. In the work that I do help, I work with people that are transitioning to university, and it people are caught up with titles, and I have this conversation about the BA like a million times that there's nothing wrong with the BA. This is you should do this here, but they're like, oh, the BA sounds terrible. I'm like, oh no, it doesn't. It's great. And then they do the program. Actually, I'm a BA student because of exactly what you said. I go to stats class, or I go to a specs class, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what's going on here. And it's pretty crazy. And Tana, you had the same because when we first started this whole conversation all those years ago, you were sciencey, physiotherapy, economics, and then as you've gone through university, you found what your jam is, because it's become more humanities focused with the young people that you're working with now, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something you have to adapt to. And I think you're right. When you're in high school, you're so caught up on, what job does that get me? Where does that get me? Instead of what you enjoy. And I think, yeah, after that first year, I realized pretty quickly that I wanted to take papers that I would enjoy outside of the compulsory ones. So, taking conversational Māori or taking the psych paper because I thought that would be interesting. Like obviously not everything's going to go towards what I want to go towards, but at least it's given me a try of some of those things that I'd never, if I stuck to the traditional go down physiotherapy and just do that, I would have never tried some of these things, and who knows, how that would have changed me as a person.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Uni is so fun in that regard because you can just learn about so many different things, and they're all kind of connected, and just oh, I've always really loved learning. When I was little, I would go to the public library and read textbooks for fun, because I'm that kind of really interesting person. So I have loved uni because there's so many little niche topics you can get like buried into, and so many things you can learn about. Sometimes it does mean that I fall into some kind of research loophole and I forget to focus on my actual assignment. But we're working on that. Yeah.
And that's cool, right? It's better to have that than to go, oh, this is a little boring, and just tap out. So that's really awesome. I'm going to shift focus again now and talk about the stuff that you're involved in. So you have Y25 Hive. What is all that about? Let's for our listeners
Oh
who
gosh,
know nothing
there's
about
a
that.
lot of different projects.
Yeah,
I
let's
kind
go.
of
Yeah.
just have little eggs and nests everywhere. The Hive is really awesome. It's a collaboration between Curative and NYD, kind of looking at connecting youth and government.
Can I ask you a question
Uh,
before you carry on? How did you get
yeah.
involved? How did you? So we have all these opportunities. How did Hope get involved with Hive? What happened?
Well, there was a bunch of ads on Instagram being like, "Do you care about youth, like the future of youth and like youth politics?" And I was like, "I mean, yeah." So I clicked on the link, which probably I shouldn't have done looking back because scams, but it wasn't a scam,
Oh,
so that
boom.
was great.
Yeah.
And it was like, "Hey, apply for this thing, this advisory group," and I was like, "I mean, I'm trying to get captions in. This looks like something I could do to help more disabled people and change Aotearoa, I guess." And I was like, I may as well apply. And then they liked me and I got in. And I met all these really, really awesome people. And I was like, wow, I don't really know how I got in here, but it was really cool. And I met some really amazing friends.
That's a question I ask people because everyone talks about what they do, but it's that step to get them to what they're
Oh, yeah,
doing.
no, I get
Because
that.
and for you it was just an Instagram advert. Like, oh, I'll just give it a crack, and
My
I'll
main
get
advice
out.
to people is just apply for stuff.
Yeah,
Like, obviously, if you think you're wildly underqualified, have common sense. But if you're like a little bit underqualified, just go for it, because I feel like most of the opportunities I got into were because I applied to something I thought I probably wasn't going to get, but I was just going to give it a shot, and then it worked out. So just put yourself out there, and you will get some no's, but you will also get some yeses. And once you get that first yes, so many more yeses follow. So I think it's just really about putting your hand up for stuff, even if it's something small in your local community, and working up. Just like the more stuff you do, the more people take notice, and the more people you meet.
I love that. That's great. That's great advice right there. The worst thing someone can say is no.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me carry on. So yeah, so Hive. why 25? How did you get involved in all that? Well, there's some, I mean, for anyone that wants to see what Hope does, just look at LinkedIn and you'll be like, there's thousands of things there. So we're not going to cover everything. But of the things that you're involved in, what is the one that really, that's your, if someone took it away from you, you'd be like, oh no.
Oh, I love most of the things I do. Yeah, the Hive is really awesome. It's just great because I feel like I'm making a tangible impact and I get to talk to so many young people who don't feel like they care about politics. But if you ask them questions about policy, they have opinions. And then you're like, why don't you just like share these? And you get to like give them to government officials and be like, this is what these people want and need. And it's great to be able to communicate that. And oh, I just love it so much.
There's a passion right there. We're gonna take that away from you. Gone. You're like, oh no. But that's really cool. That's really cool. But what's cool about that is because everyone has got opinions and thoughts, but they fear that they are not correct. I use the word correct because everyone is trying to be correct and not being seen like, oh, I'm tipping the. Why does my opinion matter? Is the way nothing happens, right?
Yeah, and I think that youth political engagement has been so low historically that it's so important for young people to raise their voice and be heard. And obviously, it's hard when people don't take attention to you or take you really seriously because you're young. But I feel like it's just so important for young people to step up, especially in this current social political climate where we have things like climate change and like we need to fight for our future because no one else is going to do it, you know? And I'm not necessarily a climate change activist, although I'd like to be. I just don't have enough time.
Surprise, surprise! They hope. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. But you know, there's so much going on that it's going to affect our generation and the generations after us, and we just need to make sure that we speak, because even if people disagree with what we've said, we need to make sure that we've said it and we've at least tried to make a difference. You know?
Yeah, that's very, very true. What's been the hardest challenge for you as you've gone on this advocacy path, or actually not just advocacy path? I think we're going to focus on that there.
Gosh, there's a few things. I think for me, I really struggled because people would see me as a representative of these communities that I was a part of, and I will be like, but I can't represent everyone because these communities are so diverse and there's such a depth and breadth of opinion. So I kind of had to learn how to be okay with that and to like express that to people who wanted to work with me and be like, I'm not every deaf person, I'm not every queer person. But I think I kind of got a hang of that. I think also just it was really scary because I kind of felt the weight of if I didn't succeed, I was letting down this community that I really cared about. And that was quite scary. And it still is quite scary, the idea that what if I mess up? And also because tokenism is the thing, right? And often when you
100%.
get involved in projects, you're the only person that represents a certain area of your identity. And you have to represent everyone. So if you mess up, it's kind of like the whole community that you represent messes up and that's all they see.
Yeah.
So that can be quite hard. So just being okay with not being perfect and asking for help and acknowledging that I don't always know what's going on, which I know, but like admitting that out loud can be kind of scary because I just want to be this like perfect advocate and activist and fix everything, and I can't do that. There's no way I could do that. But I know, just like being able to acknowledge that I am flawed and being okay with being an imperfect advocate has been something that's been a really big thing for me, just because I want to represent my community and set up for them the best way I can. So whenever I mess up, I really beat myself up about it. So being able to be okay with that and move on and still continue fighting has been a big thing for me.
It's interesting because sometimes your passion is also your weakness because you're so passionate about it, whatever it is, that if you, in your own eyes, if you feel like you failed, it's like you said before, it's not just you failed everyone else. But actually, we step back and go, wait a minute, that was just a tiny blip. But in that moment there, that blip is everything, because you're so passionate about it.
Yeah, I think the Y has been really helpful for that. The Y25 is like a network of 25 young women under 25 and non-binary people. But it's like this network that the YWCA runs, and they pick out 25 people every year. I was really honored to be selected, but that's been amazing because I can talk to people who are in similar spaces and way more impressive spaces than I am. and kind of we all felt that same pressure to be like this perfect advocate and represent our community. So being able to talk to people and get that validation and reassurance has been really nice, and I've made some really cool friendships through that.
Oh, that's beautiful. And again, it goes back to what we said right somewhere in the middle of our conversation, that even if you just change one person's life, that's an impact that is generational, and the ripple effect is really it's priceless. You can't quantify that.
Yeah, definitely.
But when you're in the charge going forward, you're like, oh, I'm falling over a little bit. You forget about that ripple effect. Yep. So it's human to think that there. Tana, any questions before we ask our lovely, beautiful last question, which we would like to throw to people?
No, I think we've touched. Yeah, I think we've touched on everything. Yeah, I think you've navigated the podcast well.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope I've got
hopefully
sorry.
I've been a good speaking person. I'm kind of just saying stuff.
I hope you've been fantastic. You know, there's so much here, and actually, there's so much we can go into. There's tons we can go into, and I think we would love to have you back at some point, because I think
Oh, thank you. That would be lovely.
in a year's time there'll be so much that you can come back with, which will be epic. But we're not going to let you go just like that. There, our podcast is called Baskets of Knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And every week we invite our guests, aka Hope today, to share a piece of knowledge we'd love our listeners and myself and Tanya to put into a basket of knowledge.
Ooh.
And this could be from a lived experience, it could be from anything. And you can have two if you want, but normally we'll give you one, but we'll give you two today.
Okay, I'm just trying to think of a good way to phrase this so that it sounds like catchy and important. Gosh. I really like the phrase imperfect advocacy, because I feel like so often if we're trying to stand up for a community or an issue that we really care about, we feel like we have to be these perfect, amazing people and be like the next Greta Thunberg or whatever, who like legend. But acknowledging that no human is perfect, and that actually if you don't do it, there's no guarantee that anyone else will. So when it comes to advocacy, acknowledging that you are imperfect, but you are there and you care, and that is enough, as long as you're working to better yourself, you know? So yeah, I think that was the thing for me, was realizing actually, if I don't stand up for myself and the people I care about, and I'm just waiting for someone else to do it, who is that someone else? I don't know. So realizing that and being like, okay, I can be that someone, and I'm not perfect, but I don't need to be, and it's okay not to be, has been a big thing for me, and I hope that's something that people can take away. If that's helpful, I don't know.
It's beautifully helpful, because you know, a lot of time, not just in advocacy but in life, everyone waits for the perfect day, the perfect moment.
There is no perfect moment.
Exactly.
And I think especially within, I don't know if this is related or not, actually this might be a tangent, but I know within faith, I always felt like I had to be the quote unquote perfect Christian before I could like finalize my relationship with God or be baptized or anything like that. And then I realized there is no perfect Christian, there is no perfect person. And actually, I feel like in all facets of life, I'm someone who very much likes things to be organized and under control, and I must control everything, which I'm getting better at not doing. But yeah, I think for me, realizing that actually this world isn't perfect and there is a lot of beauty in those imperfections, and it's okay, and just acknowledging that in all facets, and no matter where you're trying to make change or how you're trying to make the world better, you have to first acknowledge that you are imperfect and this world is imperfect, and you have to work with those imperfections.
Yeah, totally. And I love a saying that I use in my coaching world, that done is better than perfect. It doesn't matter what it looks like, you know. You're gonna learn lessons. You will make mistakes, and this is how you're gonna grow. But if you don't do anything, you know, you're gonna be stuck in the perfect idea in your brain, but you're not gonna do anything. So make a mistake, get out there and do stuff. So it's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think that relates across everything in life, not just advocacy, but obviously for you advocacy. But I think, like you said, it's in any it could be in faith, it could be in relationships, career, what you wear today, anything, which is really beautiful.
And you know, sometimes decisions, especially if you live with anxiety, can be so like paralyzing. You can get such decision fatigue, and sometimes you just have to make a decision and know that whether or not it was the best decision, it is a decision, and life can still be good either way, and you just have to move on.
That's right, exactly. And I think a lot of us live live in the fear of what if, but what if in a negative space. We never go, what if this works out? We go, what if this doesn't work out? And I think if but that's human conditioning, right?
Yeah,
There's so many different things. So yeah, beautiful. Tony, any last questions or any last comments?
No, it's all right. It's just been an awesome podcast to be a part of, and I think it's cool to see young people advocating for things that they know that they can advocate about. I think growing up, I was passionate about trying to get youth voice heard, and how can we do it while we're still living and breathing the experiences that we are. And I think a couple of years ago it wasn't as prevalent as it is now, and maybe that's just in part because of the groups and the groups that I'm a part of. But I also think that there's a lot more people realizing that it needs to be a collaborative approach, especially in these areas that youth are experiencing. And that's a big thing within my research as well. These children, in regards with their physical activity, they know what's happening, and sometimes we just don't give children or young adults the credit that they deserve in terms of what they're experiencing. So I think it's really cool to see you out there advocating for these things that you are clearly so passionate about.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to meet you both and to be a part of this podcast. So thank you both for having me.
No worries at all. Thank you very much. I'll round up the podcast now. For our listeners out there, hopefully you have learned something, not just for you to put into your life, but also something that you've never heard of before, and something that's going to change the way you look at people around you and be more accepting and be more understanding. And like Hope said, listening and hearing, but being an active listener as well, really important. But if you haven't, go back and listen to the podcast, because you've definitely missed out lots of amazing things. Hope, thank you for jumping on today. Tana and myself really appreciate this on such short notice as well. There's so much in here for me to go back and think about and reflect in my own life. And for our regular listeners, thank you so much as always. Please feel free to share, like, and comment on this podcast. Until next time, ka kite, and don't forget to put something into your basket of knowledge. Till then, bye everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Baskets of Knowledge.
Yeah, we hope that you found something useful to put into your basket of knowledge. And as we said before, remember to put something little into your baskets of knowledge every week. And as always, feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast. Thanks, everybody. Bye.